Welcome to Volume 5 of the Zeteticism.com series on Flat Earth, titled Zetetic Water and Sunset Reflection Patterns. This edition of the series will show further evidence that the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model for flat Earth is the correct model that describes our physical reality here on the Earth plane. It is important to note that the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope is a flat Earth model, but it involves the idea that the Earth plane is not perfectly flat, but involves an embowment, as you're seeing on your screen right now, and which was discussed in detail in Volume 1. What is specifically discussed in this volume of the series is the various sorts of sunset reflection patterns, such as the one you happen to be seeing in your screen, but there are more than one type of pattern that are regularly exhibited in sunsets across the Earth, which is, of course, a problem for heliocentrism, since heliocentrism should only involve one pattern, namely the pattern of a sun setting across a convex surface. What we will do is analyze the various sunset patterns that exist and show that there is only one scenario that can account for these repeatable and limited in number sunset reflection patterns across oceans and lakes on the Earth plane as the sun begins to, quote, touch, unquote, in appearance the horizon at sunset time. The various patterns are perfectly reproducible across an embowed zetetic surface, but which are not reproducible across a convex surface or a perfectly flat surface. This will provide significant empirical evidence for the zetetic reality that we are living in, and for the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model specifically for our zetetic reality. To understand the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model, please see Volumes 1 through 4 of this series, especially Volume 1 and Volume 4. But to give you a brief introduction right here for just a few seconds, the picture on your screen is what the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model involves, where humans are existing on an embowed zetetic plane, that's what Earth is, spinning inside of a gyroscope. Gravitation, southern star trails, 24-hour Antarctica sunlight, and many other issues can be readily empirically explained according to the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model. And even a few things that are impossible to explain according to the heliocentric model, such as sundogs, or the sun changing in size, growing upon rising and shrinking upon setting. To understand how the Earth plane can be embowed, and how what I'm referring to as zetetic water can involve an embowment, please review Zeteticism Volume 1, where it is discussed how the Earth plane is fixed in its foundations on the inside of a gyroscope, but the gyroscope in turn is turning, creating an effect loosely analogous to the idea if you have a bucket with water in it, where the bucket handle has a rope attached to it and you whirl it around in a circle quickly, the water will stay in the back of the bucket and will not fall out even when the bucket is upside down. It was empirically discovered that it very well is likely the case that that is in fact what gravitation is. Again, see Volumes 1 and Volume 4 for further discussion. But we can see a clear mechanism for how water can involve an embowment. But let's move into our analysis now. Consider the picture of a sunset you are seeing in your screen now. The sun reflection off of the water extends from the horizon basically to one's feet on the shoreline. To the filmmaker's knowledge, the zetetic research community to this point has discussed this sunset line and how it is very mysterious that it can extend continuously all the way from the sun in the distance at the horizon to the shoreline. Indeed, that is peculiar, as this is a convex surface and there should be a fading out as the sunset line approaches the shoreline. However, this will not be an issue that will be heavily discussed in this video. The issues discussed are as follows. Notice the sunset patterns diagrammed on your screen right now. As just mentioned a moment ago, there are multiple types of repeated sunset patterns that occur for observers on Earth when viewing sunsets from a beach. Only one of these works for a sun setting over a convex surface. And some of them, as we'll see, exhibit exactly the opposite scenario of what should be observed for a sun setting across and over a convex surface. This is a serious, if not fatal, empirical problem for the heliocentric model. Due to the fact that these are simple, ordinary optics 101, so to speak, situations. And the same repeating sunset pattern of the sun setting over a convex surface should be exhibited every single time the sun sets. It would appear this is an enormously simple issue, and the fact that the sun does not exhibit these patterns most of the time, and exhibits patterns of light at sunset that are opposite of what is expected over a convex surface, and more specifically, exhibit light reflection patterns characteristic of an embowed or flat surface, would appear to function as a hard empirical proof that the Earth that you are living on is not a globe. What you're seeing on your screen are some of the routine situations where the sunset contradicts the situation of a sun light source setting behind and across and over a convex surface. These situations with the sunset and the symbol are simply put opposite scenarios of one another, which clearly indicates that the Earth does not involve a sun setting over a convex surface, but rather an embowed surface. You are seeing the clearest of empirical evidence for that right in front of your eyes right now. As discussed in previous volumes of this series, especially volumes 1 and 4, the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope involves an embowed Earth plane which looks roughly like this, where in one direction its surface is structured like the inside of a sphere, but only part of a sphere, maybe 20 or 30% at very most. And then in the other direction, the surface is level or flat. It is this sort of a zetetic surface that can accommodate all of the sunset patterns, including one that mimics a sunset over a convex surface. To the filmmaker's knowledge, this is somewhat of a rarer scenario of a sunset pattern that occurs, but it nevertheless does occur on Earth, and of course it can be simulated with an embowed book with a lighter setting behind it. The situation for a sun setting over a convex surface should appear something like this. If we simulate the sunset across the convex surface in a much more exaggerated fashion, using a symbol with a lighter receding behind it, we can see that the sunset line retreats from the beach, from the edge of the symbol that is. The light pattern across the symbol is thickest as the sun approaches the symbol as it's going down, as the lighter travels downward, that is. And the sunset light pattern narrows as it extends toward the beach, or that is the edge of the symbol. So while the filmmaker is not exactly sure what should be observed over a convex surface, it's probably something like this. But of course not to the extremely exaggerated degree that the convex symbol surface is creating in this simulation. It would be a much more subdued V pattern. What the specific nature of the V pattern is not the point. The point is that over a convex surface, there is in fact a V-like pattern that can be simulated when setting a lighter behind it. So how can it be the case on the globe Earth supposed convex surfaces can produce a sunset pattern that looks like this, and which is exactly the opposite of that which is simulated with the convex surface of the symbol? The filmmaker does not see any other conclusion that can be drawn other than sunset patterns such as you're seeing now contradict what needs to be found on a convex surface, and therefore the Earth is not a convex surface. The Earth is a zetetic embowed surface, meaning it's flat in one direction and embowed in the other, as just mentioned. To very briefly sum up what has been stated so far in this volume of the Zeteticism series, we have conducted an extremely simple experiment, simply moving a light source behind a convex surface to see what simple, ordinary optics scenarios emerge, repeatable, the same every time, where the concentration point or bulge of light moves away from the observer and meets the sun at the horizon when the sun touches, in appearance, the horizon. Very simple, the simplest of optical experimentation. However, when we very simply take this information and compare it to the sunsets viewed across the surface of Earth, we do not find a single repeating pattern, but we find multiple, and one of the most prominent to appear is exactly the opposite scenario of a convex surface with a light source setting behind it, and therefore logic would lead to the conclusion that we must infer that at least part of the time some percentage of sunsets on Earth are viewed across an embowed rather than convex surface. And other times across a flat surface in the other direction of the embowed plane, or at an angle across the embowed surface. This would appear to be stark evidence for the Zetetic Eye Gyroscope model and its embowed plane, embowed in one direction and flat in the perpendicular direction. Probably the most predominant of the sunset patterns viewed is the one where when the sun approaches and first touches, quote unquote, the horizon, all and any sort of reflection vanishes, simply does not exist. To repeat, this is probably the most readily observed sunset pattern there is. It is extremely important to note how closely this matches the simulated embowed lighter experiment where when the lighter sets on the far side of the book, looking across the book's embowed surface, first the light bulge and concentration moves away from the horizon toward the observer, opposite of what's supposed to happen with the heliocentric model. And then after that point, all reflection vanishes, while the lighter, or sun, is still high in the sky, or in other words, high over the far end of the book, which represents the horizon, of course. And then the lighter is made to continue in its moving downward until it is set. The lighter and book experiment perfectly mimics probably the most readily observed and predominant sunset pattern there is on Earth. Therefore, it has to be concluded that these sunsets are in fact being viewed over an embowed body of water. There is no other explanation that can suffice, that can match the data. This is a sort of smoking gun that we humans live in a zetetic situation, looking out over zetetic water, watching sunsets under the dome that was empirically verified to exist in volumes 2 and 3, and where we can therefore inductively infer that there is a creator that created us. Here you can watch the sunset line vanish from the water when the sun is far in the sky. Precisely the same situation as with the lighter going behind the embowed book. And the opposite situation as when the lighter goes behind the concave symbol. The reflection up to the horizon point of the symbol stays very visible until the lighter is significantly behind the symbol. Here we can compare time-lapse of sunset footage with the lighter going behind the book. It would appear to be the case that the very same patterns are exhibited. The light concentration or bulge of light and the reflection gets smaller as it moves towards the observer at the beach or book edge. The opposite of what is supposed to happen on the heliocentric scenario. As stated earlier, it's hard to understand how this could not be a smoking gun verification that we humans live in a zetetic, flat Earth reality, where the flat plane does, however, exhibit an embowment. And here is a possible additional match from the embowed surface to reality. You'll notice that there's a slight hourglass structure to the sunlight reflection line. Although this may be hard to measure, it does appear some pictures involve such an hourglass structure, slight as it is. All but one of the scenarios, the one that exhibits the convex surface, which is rarely observed. When the light concentration moves toward the beach, often the last place sunlight will be seen. It is very important to note how much of a dire contradiction this is to this being a picture of a sunset, of a sun setting behind a convex surface. It cannot be the case. As hard as it might be to believe, these pictures should be a sound empirical proof that the Earth is an embowed zetetic plane. Before the supposed moon landings, that was supposedly the point where humans really knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that they cannot see the shape of the world, but they can now absolutely 100% know the shape of the world to be a ball. The world is not flat, as a few years earlier astronauts pronounced. The point here is that until recently, a sidewalk verification for what the shape of the Earth is was not known. In other words, when one lives on the surface of the Earth, one does not know the shape of the surface of the Earth. The human can see its mountains and valleys and plains, but that's all the human can see, and therefore the overall macroscopic shape of the world they live in is unknown. It was apparently known to be a zetetic plane under a dome in ancient biblical times. But that information somewhere along the way was for the most part lost, now being rediscovered, and this video presents the second sidewalk verification for the shape of the Earth. In other words, one can know with empirical certainty that even though one typically only understands the world in terms of mountains, valleys, and plains, and therefore cannot deduce the overall shape, we can nevertheless have an empirical verification that we can verify from the sidewalk that the Earth is a zetetic plane. The first sidewalk verification was in volumes 2 through 4, where sundogs provide a sidewalk verification for the existence of a dome over a flat plane, a zetetic plane, or what this video series would label as an embowed surface. And the light patterns of sunsets provides the second sidewalk empirical verification of the flat Earth theory.